No one helped the dying Tarkalian princess, blood oozing from her slashed throat, except for Jeremy Shaw, the human combat medic who had saved hundreds just like her on this brutal battlefield. Jeremy's hands were slick with blood, both red human and green Tarkalian, as he frantically worked to stabilize the wounded in the cramped field hospital. The stench of burnt flesh and acrid smoke choked the air. Soldiers screamed for morphine, clutching mangled limbs. For 3 days straight, Jeremy had triaged the unending flow of casualties from the colony's last stand against the Tarkalian invaders. But now he needed a break or he'd collapse. He was about to slip outside for a moment's rest when a ball of fire streaked across the sky. A Tarkalian scout ship, trailing smoke and flames. It smashed into the valley floor 100 meters from the hospital. "Shaw, where the fuck are you going?" Captain Briggs yelled as Jeremy sprinted toward the wreckage, medkit in hand. Oath or not, no way would the troops let him heal one of those scaly monsters. The ship's crumpled hatch screeched as Jeremy wrenched it open, revealing an unconscious Tarkalian female. Her ornate armor marked her as high-ranking, maybe even royalty. Green blood oozed from vicious cuts across her throat and chest. One wrong move, and the razor-sharp talons on her feet and hands could disembowel him in a fraction of a second. Without hesitation, Jeremy hauled her limp body from the wreckage, ignoring the shouts and curses from the human troops behind him. If he didn't act fast, this alien would die, royalty or not. He lowered her to the ground and reached for a hypospray. Her cat-like eyes suddenly snapped open, pupils narrowed to slits. Lightning fast, she swiped at his exposed neck with 3-inch claws. Jeremy deflected the blow and jammed the hypospray into her shoulder, sedating her instantly. Jeremy had minutes to reach the last escape shuttle, but that meant abandoning his patient to certain death. Gritting his teeth, he hoisted the unconscious Tarkalian over his shoulders and ran. Energy bolts stitched the ground around him as Tarkalian fighters screeched overhead. Searing heat scorched his lungs as colony structures exploded into flames. The roar of the shuttle's engines grew louder. Jeremy stumbled up the ramp seconds before it snapped shut. Slumping against the wall, drained and gasping, he laid the princess on the deck as concerned murmurs rippled through the packed compartment. Colonel Hawkins elbowed his way over, eyes narrowed. "What in God's name were you thinking, Shaw? That thing is the enemy." He gestured at the unconscious Tarkalian. "She's coming with me. Maybe her carcass can buy us a ceasefire." "No, sir," Jeremy replied, locking eyes with Hawkins. "She's my patient. I won't let you kill her." "You'll regret this, medic," Hawkins snarled. "If that scaly bitch causes any trouble, I'm feeding you to her buddies slowly." The colonel spun on his heel and marched off. As the shuttle accelerated away from Zephyrus toward an uncertain rendezvous with the human fleet, Jeremy looked down at Princess Vortis. What the hell had he gotten himself into? The escape shuttle shuddered as it docked with the human battlecruiser, the HMS Indomitable, in orbit around Zephyrus. Jeremy unstrapped himself from his seat, keeping a watchful eye on the unconscious Princess Vortis. As the airlock hissed open, a squad of armored Marines stormed in, rifles raised. "Stand down," Jeremy barked, placing himself between the Marines and Vortis. "She's my patient." Jeremy scooped up Vortis and pushed past the Marines, ignoring their suspicious glares. He navigated the battlecruiser's labyrinthine corridors, Vortis's limp form draped over his arms, until he reached the medical bay. Dr. Samir Patel, the ship's chief medical officer, looked up from a holographic display as Jeremy entered. His eyes widened at the sight of Vortis. "Put that thing on the table," Dr. Patel ordered, reaching for a scanner. "I'll take it from here." "With all due respect, sir, I'll be overseeing her treatment," Jeremy said firmly, laying Vortis on the examination table. Dr. Patel's brow furrowed. "You forget yourself, medic. This is my medbay. That creature is a dangerous enemy combatant. Hand it over now." As the two men argued, Vortis's eyes fluttered open. She blinked, taking in her unfamiliar surroundings. Suddenly she lunged off the table, razor-sharp claws slashing at Dr. Patel's face. Jeremy reacted instantly, tackling Vortis to the ground. He pinned her arms behind her back as she thrashed and hissed, her talons scraping against the deck. "Easy, easy," Jeremy whispered in her ear, his voice calm and soothing. "You're safe. No one's going to hurt you." Gradually, Vortis's struggles subsided. Her tense muscles relaxed as she realized Jeremy wasn't a threat. Dr. Patel watched in amazement as Jeremy helped Vortis to her feet, keeping a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "All right, Shaw," Dr. Patel said grudgingly. "You can continue treating your patient, but I'll be monitoring you closely. One wrong move and she's out the airlock. Understood?" Jeremy nodded, guiding Vortis to a private room off the main medbay. Over the next few days he worked around the clock to treat her injuries, changing bandages and administering antibiotics. As Vortis regained her strength, Jeremy learned more about her mission. "I was sent to negotiate a truce with your people," Vortis explained, her voice still weak. "But my ship was attacked before I could make contact. Your kind are not as savage as I was led to believe." Jeremy smiled wryly. "And your kind aren't the mindless monsters we were told about. Guess we've both been fed a lot of lies." Their conversation was interrupted by a blaring alarm. Commander Elena Novak's voice echoed through the ship. "All hands battle stations. We've received a distress call from Arcadia Colony. It's under heavy Tarkalian assault." Jeremy's heart raced. He had to join the fight to protect his fellow humans. But he couldn't abandon Vortis, not after everything they'd been through. As if reading his thoughts, Vortis placed a clawed hand on Jeremy's arm. "I can help you," she said, her yellow eyes gleaming with determination. "I know the Tarkalian battle strategies. Together we can save your colony." Jeremy hesitated, torn between his duties. Finally he nodded. "All right, but we do this my way. No heroics, no vendettas. We fight to protect, not destroy." Vortis bared her fangs in a fierce grin. "As you wish, human. Let us hunt together as allies." As the Indomitable hurtled through hyperspace towards Arcadia Colony, an unlikely partnership was forged between a human medic and a Tarkalian princess. A bond that would be tested in the crucible of war. The HMS Indomitable shuddered as it dropped out of hyperspace into a maelstrom of plasma fire and debris. Tarkalian warships swarmed around the beleaguered human colony of New Carthage, pummeling its defenses with relentless bombardment. In the battlecruiser's armory, Jeremy Shaw helped Princess Vortis strap on a suit of human combat armor, modified to fit her alien physique. As he checked the seals on her helmet, Vortis grabbed his wrist, her claws pressing into his skin. "Jeremy, there's something you need to know," she said, her voice crackling through the helmet's speakers. "I possess psionic abilities, a rare gift among my people. I've kept them hidden all my life, but now I think they could turn the tide of this battle." Jeremy stared at her, his eyes wide behind his visor. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" Nodding, Jeremy helped her to her feet. "I'll cover you out there. Just promise me you won't do anything too crazy, okay?" Minutes later, they were crammed into a drop pod with a dozen other soldiers, hurtling towards the planet's surface. The pod shook violently as it punched through the atmosphere, its heat shields glowing cherry red. With a bone-jarring impact, the pod slammed into the ground, its hatches blasting open. Jeremy and Vortis leaped out, weapons at the ready, into a scene of utter chaos. Human and Tarkalian forces clashed in a brutal melee, energy weapons flashing and swords clashing. Jeremy and Vortis fought side by side, moving in perfect sync. Jeremy laid down covering fire with his pulse rifle, while Vortis lashed out with her psionic powers, sending Tarkalian soldiers flying like ragdolls. As they pushed towards the enemy command post, Jeremy suddenly froze, his blood turning to ice in his veins. There, among the Tarkalian ranks, stood a figure he never thought he'd see again, his brother, Marcus, decked out in the armor of a Tarkalian officer. Marcus locked eyes with Jeremy, a cruel sneer twisting his lips. He raised his plasma rifle, aiming not at Jeremy but at Vortis. Jeremy saw the flash of the muzzle too late as the bolt of superheated plasma streaked towards the princess. Without thinking, Jeremy hurled himself in front of Vortis, taking the full force of the blast. Searing pain ripped through his body as he crumpled to the ground, his armor smoking and melted. His vision swam, darkness creeping in at the edges. Distantly, he heard Vortis scream his name, her voice raw with anguish. Through blurred eyes, he saw her stand over him, her psionic aura flaring like a supernova. With a primal roar, she unleashed a shockwave of pure mental energy, sweeping across the battlefield like a tsunami. Tarkalian soldiers dropped like puppets with their strings cut, their minds shattered by Vortis's psychic onslaught. Even Marcus was driven to his knees, clutching his head in agony. As reinforcements poured in to secure the area, Vortis knelt beside Jeremy, cradling his head in her lap. Tears streamed down her scaly cheeks, mingling with the blood on Jeremy's face. "Stay with me, human," she whispered fiercely. "Don't you dare leave me now. I swear on my life I will save you as you saved me." Jeremy tried to speak, but only a wet cough escaped his lips, speckling Vortis's armor with crimson droplets. As he slipped into unconsciousness, he heard Vortis shouting orders to the medics, her voice laced with desperation and rage. Jeremy clawed his way back to consciousness, every nerve in his body screaming in agony. He blinked, the harsh lights of the medical bay searing his retinas. A scaly hand gripped his, and he turned to see Vortis at his bedside, her yellow eyes filled with concern. "I have been in a coma for 3 days," she said, her voice raspy with exhaustion. "Marcus escaped during the battle. The Tarkalians retreated to their stronghold on the southern continent." Jeremy gritted his teeth, rage and betrayal coursing through his veins. He had to confront his brother, to find out why he had turned against his own people. He struggled to sit up, ignoring the searing pain in his chest. "I'm going after him," he growled, swinging his legs over the side of the bed. Vortis placed a clawed hand on his shoulder, pushing him back down. "You're in no condition to fight," she hissed, "but I'll help you on one condition. I'm coming with you." Jeremy opened his mouth to argue, but the fire in Vortis's eyes made him pause. She had proven herself a valuable ally, and he knew he couldn't do this alone. He nodded curtly. As they gathered their gear, Commander Novak strode into the medical bay, her face grim. "The Tarkalian Emperor is here," she said. "He's demanding the return of his daughter. High Command has ordered me to hand her over in exchange for a ceasefire." Jeremy surged to his feet, ignoring the wave of dizziness that washed over him. "You can't do that," he shouted. "Vortis is one of us now. She deserves asylum." Novak held up a hand, her eyes conflicted. "I don't like it any more than you do, Shaw, but I have my orders." She paused, then lowered her voice. "You have 24 hours to complete your mission and bring back proof of Marcus's treachery. After that, I'll have no choice but to hand her over." Jeremy and Vortis exchanged a glance, a silent understanding passing between them. They had to act fast. Under the cover of darkness, they infiltrated the Tarkalayan stronghold, slipping past patrols and security systems with a combination of stealth and Vortis's psionic abilities. They navigated a labyrinth of tunnels and chambers, drawing ever closer to the command center. Suddenly a plasma bolt sizzled past Jeremy's ear. He spun, drawing his sword, to find Marcus emerging from the shadows, flanked by a squad of elite guards. "Hello, brother," Marcus sneered, his eyes cold and cruel. "I see you've brought your pet Tarkalian. How touching." Jeremy charged, his blade clashing against Marcus's in a blaze of sparks. They dueled ferociously, spinning and slashing, their faces inches apart. Behind them, Vortis engaged the guards, her psionic powers making them see illusions, turning them against each other. She moved like a whirlwind, her claws and fangs flashing in the dim light. With a final, desperate lunge, Jeremy disarmed Marcus, sending his sword clattering to the floor. He pressed the tip of his blade to his brother's throat, his chest heaving. "Why?" he demanded, his voice cracking. "Why did you betray us?" Marcus laughed, a bitter, broken sound. "I didn't have a choice," he spat. "The Tarkalians captured me, broke me, remade me into their agent." He reached into his pocket, tossing a data chip at Jeremy's feet. "There's your proof. The Tarkalians don't just want to conquer humanity. They want the whole damn galaxy." Jeremy scooped up the chip, his mind reeling. He turned to Vortis, who stood over the unconscious bodies of the guards, her armor splattered with green blood. "We have to get this back to Novak," he said, his voice urgent. "We have to convince her to grant you asylum, to use this evidence to unite the other races against the Tarkalians." Vortis nodded, her eyes blazing with determination. Together they raced back through the tunnels, the precious data clutched in Jeremy's hand, the fate of the galaxy hanging in the balance. As Jeremy and Vortis burst onto the bridge of the HMS Indomitable, Commander Novak spun to face them, her eyes wide. On the view screen loomed the massive bulk of the Tarkalian Emperor's flagship, bristling with weapons. "Sure, what the hell?" Novak began, but Jeremy cut her off. "Commander, we have proof of the Tarkalians' true intentions, but we need to act fast." He held up the data chip, his hand shaking from exhaustion and pain. Novak's eyes flicked from Jeremy to Vortis, then to the flagship. Her jaw tightened. "The Emperor is demanding Vortis's return. I have orders to comply." "So you can't," Jeremy shouted, stepping in front of Vortis. "Commander, please, let me go with her. I can sabotage their ship from the inside. Buy us some time." "Are you insane?" Novak snapped. "If you fail, I'll have no choice but to disavow any knowledge of your actions. You'll be on your own." Jeremy locked eyes with her, his voice steady. "I understand, ma'am, but it's our only chance." Novak held his gaze for a long moment, then nodded curtly. "Go inshore, don't fuck this up." Minutes later, Jeremy and Vortis materialized on the flagship's transport pad, surrounded by armed Tarkalian guards. The Emperor himself strode forward, his yellow eyes glinting beneath his crown of horns. "Daughter," he rumbled, spreading his arms wide. "Welcome home. I see you've done well in infiltrating the humans." Vortis bowed low, her voice steady. "Thank you, Father. I have much to share." The Emperor's gaze slid to Jeremy, his lip curling. "Take the human to the brig. I'll deal with him later." As the guards dragged Jeremy away, he caught Vortis's eye, seeing the flash of fear beneath her calm facade. Then the doors slid shut, and he was alone. In the brig, Jeremy paced the cramped cell, his mind racing. He had to find a way out to complete the mission. Suddenly the door hissed open, revealing a tall, wiry Tarkalian with cold, calculating eyes. "Human," the Tarkalian hissed, stalking forward. "I am Zaxxon, the Emperor's spymaster, and you will tell me everything you know." Jeremy felt a sharp pain in his temple as Zaxxon pressed a device against his skin. Instantly his mind was flooded with searing agony, his thoughts unraveling like frayed thread. He gritted his teeth, focusing on his training, on the techniques he'd learned to resist interrogation. But Zaxxon was relentless, probing deeper and deeper into Jeremy's psyche, tearing through his defenses like paper. Jeremy felt his will crumbling, his secrets rising to the surface like bubbles in boiling water. Just as he was about to break, the door exploded inward, showering the room with sparks. Vortis stood in the doorway, her eyes blazing with psionic energy, her claws outstretched. Zaxxon whirled, snarling, but Vortis was faster. A bolt of pure mental force slammed into the spymaster, hurling him against the wall with a sickening crunch. Jeremy sagged to his knees, gasping for breath. They fought their way through the ship, dodging blaster fire and slashing through Tarkalian guards. Jeremy's muscles burned with fatigue, but he pushed on, planting explosive charges at key structural points as they went. At the reactor core they skidded to a halt, their blood running cold. The Emperor stood before them, his eyes blazing with fury, a massive plasma axe clenched in his claws. "Traitorous filth," he snarled, advancing on Vortis. "I should have gutted you the moment you were born." Jeremy leapt forward, his plasma sword flashing to life. He met the Emperor's first blow with a bone-jarring impact, the air sizzling with energy. They dueled across the catwalk, plasma blades clashing in a blinding flurry. Vortis darted for the reactor controls, her claws flying over the console. "Jeremy!" she shouted over the roar of the engines. 60 seconds! Jeremy redoubled his attacks, pouring every ounce of strength into his aching muscles. The Emperor matched him blow for blow, his eyes gleaming with malice. "For you think you can defeat me, human?" he sneered, his blade hammering down on Jeremy's like a meteor strike. "I have conquered 1,000 worlds. Your kind are nothing but insects beneath my feet." Jeremy felt his arms trembling, his vision blurring. He couldn't keep this up much longer. Suddenly, Vortis was at his side, her claws raking across the Emperor's face. The Emperor howled in pain, staggering back. Jeremy saw his chance. With a final, desperate lunge, he drove his blade through the Emperor's chest, the plasma hissing as it pierced flesh and bone. The Emperor slumped to the deck, his crown clattering to the floor. Jeremy turned to Vortis, his breath coming in ragged gasps. They sprinted for the hangar bay, alarms blaring in their ears, the ship shuddering beneath their feet. They barely made it to a shuttle before the explosions began, tearing through the flagship like fiery claws. As they rocketed away from the disintegrating ship, Jeremy slumped in his seat, his eyes closed. He felt Vortis's hand on his, her claws warm and reassuring. Jeremy managed a weak smile. "Yeah, I guess we did." The shuttle docked with the Indomitable, and they stumbled onto the bridge, battered and bloody but triumphant. Commander Novak turned to face them, her expression unreadable. Jeremy held up the data chip, his hand shaking. "Commander, we have the evidence. The Tarkaleans, they're not just after human space. They want the whole damn galaxy." Novak took the chip, her eyes widening as she scanned its contents. She looked up at Jeremy and Vortis, something like respect flickering in her gaze. "Well done, both of you. I'm transmitting this to High Command now. With any luck, this will be enough to rally the other races to our cause." As the transmission beamed across the stars, Jeremy felt a surge of hope rising in his chest. For the first time in years, he dared to believe that maybe, just maybe, they had a chance to win this war. He turned to Vortis, seeing the same hope reflected in her eyes. They had come so far through so much pain and sacrifice, but they had done it together, human and Tarkalean, united against a common foe. And as the Indomitable set course for the front lines, Jeremy knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, he would face them with Vortis at his side, now and always. As the dust settled in the wake of the Emperor's flagship's destruction, the Tarkalean forces scattered, their command structure in tatters. The Emperor himself, gravely wounded but clinging stubbornly to life, retreated to the Tarkalean homeworld, his fury burning hotter than the stars. Even as his lifeblood seeped from his wounds, he vowed revenge against the humans who had defied him, and the daughter who had betrayed him. On the HMS Indomitable, Jeremy and Vortis found themselves hailed as heroes, their names spoken with reverence by every soldier in the fleet. For a brief moment, as the galaxy caught its breath and prepared for the coming storm, they allowed themselves to bask in the glow of victory. In the quiet moments between strategy meetings and war councils, Jeremy and Vortis grew closer, the bond between them tempered by the fires of combat. They trained together, ate together, laughed together, learning to trust and rely on each other in ways they never had before. But even as they savored this fragile peace, danger lurked in the shadows. One evening, as Vortis made her way back to her quarters after a long day of meetings, a figure stepped out from a darkened alcove, a glint of steel in his hand. Jeremy, ever watchful, ever protective, saw the danger a heartbeat before Vortis did. He lunged forward, throwing himself between Vortis and the assassin. The knife meant for Vortis's heart buried itself in Jeremy's chest, and he fell, blood spreading across the front of his uniform. Vortis reacted on instinct, her psionic power flaring to life. The assassin flew backward, his spine cracking against the bulkhead. Vortis was on him in an instant, her claws digging into his throat. As the assassin's disguise flickered and faded, Vortis found herself staring into a familiar face. Zaxxon, the Emperor's spymaster, leered up at her, his eyes glassy with pain and hatred. "You think you've won?" he hissed through bloodied teeth. "You have no idea what's coming." For decades, the Emperor had been weaving a web of influence throughout the galaxy, placing sleeper agents in positions of power on a dozen worlds. Through bribery, blackmail, and psychic manipulation, he had turned the galactic powers into his puppets, dancing to his tune. And at the center of that web, the spider pulling the strings, was none other than Admiral Graves, the Supreme Commander of Earth's military. Vorti staggered back, her mind reeling. If Graves was compromised, then the humans were walking blindly into a trap. She had to warn them, had to stop this before it was too late. She turned to Jeremy, who lay pale and still on the deck, his blood pooling around him. With a surge of desperate strength, she lifted him in her arms and ran, her feet pounding against the metal floor. In the medical bay, as doctors fought to stabilize Jeremy's condition, Vortis paced like a caged animal, her mind racing. When Jeremy finally opened his eyes, his face tight with pain, Vortis was at his side in an instant. Vortis shook her head. "You're in no condition to travel," she said. "You need to rest, to heal." Jeremy gripped her hand, his fingers weak but insistent. "I'm coming with you," he said. "You need me. Earth needs me." Vortis wanted to argue, to tell him to stay behind, to stay safe. But she knew him too well. He would never abandon his duty, never turn his back on his homeworld. And so, with heavy hearts and grim determination, they set out across the stars, racing against time to unravel the Emperor's schemes. They followed the trail of clues left by Zaxxon's shattered mind, piecing together the scope of the Emperor's machinations. Their journey led them to the heart of an asteroid field, to a hidden Tarkalian base bristling with weaponry and swarming with soldiers. Infiltrating the base was easy enough. Vortis's psionic powers made short work of the guards, but what they found inside shook them to their core. There, standing at the center of the command deck, his face twisted with cruel triumph, was Marcus, Jeremy's brother. Gone was the conflicted, broken man they had faced on New Carthage. In his place stood a true believer, a fanatic wholly devoted to the Tarkalian cause. "Hello, brother," Marcus said, his voice dripping with venom. "I knew you'd come in the end. You never could resist playing the hero." Jeremy stepped forward, his hand hovering over the hilt of his plasma sword. "Marcus," he said, his voice steady despite the pain in his eyes. "It doesn't have to be like this. You can still come back, still be the man you were." Marcus threw back his head and laughed, a sound as cold and hollow as the void. "You still don't get it, do you?" he sneered. "I was never that man. This is what I was always meant to be." With a roar of fury, he leapt at Jeremy, his plasma blade flashing. Jeremy met him head-on, their swords clashing in a blaze of light and heat. As the brothers dueled across the command deck, Vortis raced to the control panel, her claws flying over the keys. She had to download the base's data banks, had to find the proof they needed to expose Admiral Graves and stop the Emperor's plan. But even as the download neared completion, warning klaxons began to blare, the base shuddering around them. Marcus, blood streaming from a dozen wounds, staggered back, a feral grin on his face. "Oh, you're too late," he coughed, his voice wet with blood. "This base is set to self-destruct. In minutes it will be nothing but dust." Jeremy, his own wounds bleeding freely, lunged forward, his sword aimed at Marcus's heart. But Vortis was faster. With a burst of psionic energy, she sent Marcus flying, his body slamming into the far wall with a sickening crunch. "Jeremy!" she shouted, her voice raw with desperation. "We have to go now!" Together they ran, racing against the clock as the base shook itself apart around them. They barely made it to their shuttle before the entire structure exploded, the shockwave slamming into them like a hammer blow. As they limped away from the debris field, battered and bleeding but alive, Vortis plugged the data drive into the shuttle's computer. The secrets it contained, the proof of the Emperor's treachery and Admiral Graves's betrayal, glowed on the screen like a beacon of hope. But even as they set course for Earth, determined to bring the truth to light, they knew that their fight was far from over. The Emperor and his minions would stop at nothing to bury the evidence, to silence them before they could expose the rot at the heart of the galactic order. And so, as the stars streaked past their viewport, Jeremy and Vortis prepared themselves for the battles to come, their bond stronger than ever, their resolve unshakable. Come what may, they would face it together, human and Tarkalian, united against the darkness. Jeremy stood over Marcus's broken body, his plasma sword still humming in his hand. The base shook violently, explosions tearing through its structure, alarms blared, red emergency lights flashing. Marcus coughed, blood bubbling from his lips. "You think you've won, brother?" He laughed, a wet, gurgling sound. "The Emperor has one last trick up his sleeve. A mind control device capable of enslaving entire planets." Jeremy's eyes widened. He grabbed Marcus by the collar, hauling him up. "Where is it? How do we stop it?" Jeremy let Marcus's body fall, his hands shaking. Vortis appeared at his side, data drive in hand. "We have to go now," she shouted over the cacophony of destruction. They ran, dodging falling debris and gouts of flame. The hangar bay was a mess of twisted metal and burning ships. Their stolen Tarkalian fighter, battered but intact, beckoned to them like a beacon of hope. They barely made it out before the base exploded, the shockwave slamming into their ship like a hammer blow. Jeremy, hands flying over the controls, pointed the nose of the craft towards Earth and punched the thrusters to full. Hours later, they stood before the United Nations Security Council, their evidence laid bare. Vortis, head held high, recounted the Emperor's treachery, the depth of his manipulation. Jeremy, still in his scorched and dented armor, told of Marcus's final revelation, of the mind control device that threatened every free world. The council members, faces grim, conferred in hushed tones. Then the President of the United States rose to her feet. "In light of this irrefutable evidence," she declared, "we hereby remove Admiral Graves from command, effective immediately. Earth's full military might will be mobilized against the Tarkalian threat." She turned to Jeremy and Vortis, her gaze piercing. "Combat Medic Shaw, Princess Vortis, you have proven yourselves Earth's greatest champions. We task you now with leading a strike force to the Tarkalian homeworld. Capture the Emperor and destroy his mind control device by any means necessary." As they strode from the council chamber, a hooded figure detached itself from the shadows. "Shaw, Vortis," the voice was raspy, tinged with a Tarkalian accent. "I am Dr. Zorn. I believe I can help you complete your mission." Jeremy and Vortis exchanged a wary glance. Zorn lowered his hood, revealing a craggy, grey-scaled face, his yellow eyes ancient and haunted. "I created the mind control device," he said, his voice heavy with regret. "But I never meant for it to be used like this. I want to make things right." Jeremy studied Zorn for a long moment, then nodded. "We'll need all the help we can get," he said. "What do you propose?" Zorn led them to a secluded hangar bay, where a sleek Tarkalian ship awaited. "We'll disguise ourselves as Tarkalian soldiers," he explained, "and infiltrate the Emperor's stronghold. I know the palace inside and out. I can guide you to the mind control device." Jeremy and Vortis, knowing time was short, agreed to the plan. They donned Tarkalian armor, Vortis's scales and claws blending seamlessly with the disguise. As they boarded the ship, Zorn handed Jeremy a small spherical device. "A neural disruptor," he said. "It will protect you from the effects of the mind control, but use it sparingly. It has limited charge." The journey to the Tarkalian homeworld passed in a blur of hyperspace jumps and tense silence. As they entered the planet's atmosphere, Zorn's voice crackled over the comm. "Remember, once we're inside, we'll have to fight our way to the throne room. The Emperor will be protected by a force field generated by the mind control device itself." Jeremy and Vortis, weapons at the ready, nodded grimly. The ship touched down in a secluded landing pad, and they emerged into a nightmarish landscape of twisted metal and pulsing green energy. Mind-controlled Tarkalian soldiers swarmed towards them, their eyes blank and their movements jerky. Jeremy and Vortis fought like demons, plasma bolts and psionic blasts felling the mind slaves by the dozen. They battled their way into the palace, Zorn guiding them through a maze of corridors and chambers. Security drones buzzed around them, laser cannons spitting deadly beams. Vortis, her psionic powers surging, turned the drones against each other, the machines exploding in showers of sparks. At last they reached the throne room. The Emperor sat on a dais of black metal, his eyes glowing with malevolent power. Around him, a shimmering force field crackled and hummed. "Ah, my wayward daughter," the Emperor sneered, "and her pet human. How fitting that you should bear witness to my triumph." Zorn stepped forward, his hands raised in supplication. "My lord," he said, his voice trembling, "I beg you, stop this madness. The device was never meant to be used in this way." The Emperor's eyes narrowed. "You dare lecture me, worm. I am the master of the galaxy. None shall defy my will." Zorn, his face set with grim determination, reached into his robes and pulled out a small pulsing cube. "I'm sorry, my lord," he said softly, "but I cannot let you do this." He pressed a button on the cube, and the force field flickered and died. In the same instant, a bolt of energy lanced from the Emperor's hand, striking Zorn in the chest. The scientist crumpled, his life snuffed out in an instant. Jeremy and Vortis, their hearts heavy with Zorn's sacrifice, leapt forward, weapons blazing. The Emperor rose to meet them, dark power crackling around him. The final battle for the fate of the galaxy had begun. The Emperor's psionic staff crackled with dark energy as he unleashed a torrent of destruction upon Jeremy and Vortis. The human soldier rolled and dodged, his plasma sword flashing as he deflected the sizzling bolts. Vortis, her scales shimmering with psionic power, stood her ground, her mind locked in a fierce battle with the Emperor's. Jeremy lunged forward, his blade slicing through the air. The Emperor parried the blow with his staff, the force of the impact sending shockwaves through the throne room. The two warriors traded blows, their weapons clashing in a dazzling display of skill and strength. But for all his prowess, Jeremy found himself being pushed back by the Emperor's relentless assault. The Tarkalian leader seemed to draw upon an endless well of power, his eyes glowing with malevolent energy. Vortis, meanwhile, poured all of her focus into disrupting the mind control device. She could feel the twisted strands of psychic energy that bound the Tarkalian soldiers to the Emperor's will. With a cry of effort, she lashed out with her mind, severing the connections one by one. The Emperor, sensing the danger, redoubled his attacks on Jeremy. The human soldier staggered under the onslaught, his armor smoking and sparking. In that moment, Jeremy realized that he could not win this fight alone. Reaching out with his mind, he called to Vortis. "Join with me," he urged, his thoughts intertwining with hers. "Only together can we defeat him." Vortis, her mind still reeling from her psychic exertions, hesitated for only a moment. Then, with a surge of determination, she merged her consciousness with Jeremy's, their minds becoming one. The Emperor, sensing the sudden shift in the psychic landscape, faltered. Jeremy and Vortis, their minds now a single unstoppable force, pressed their advantage. They bore down on the Emperor's psyche, tearing through his mental defenses like a plasma torch through paper. The Emperor screamed, his mind buckling under the relentless assault. He clawed at his head, his staff clattering to the floor. With a final agonized cry, his mind shattered, and his body crumpled like a puppet with its strings cut. At the same instant, the mind control device exploded in a blinding flash of psychic energy. The Tarkalian soldiers, their minds suddenly freed from the Emperor's thrall, staggered and collapsed, their weapons falling from nerveless fingers. Jeremy and Vortis, their minds still intertwined, sagged to the floor, exhaustion overtaking them. For a long moment they simply lay there, their chests heaving, their hearts pounding in unison. Finally, Jeremy pulled himself to his feet, offering his hand to Vortis. She took it, her claws curling around his fingers, and together they limped from the throne room, stepping over the Emperor's lifeless body. Outside, the Tarkalian homeworld was in chaos. Soldiers and civilians alike wandered the streets, dazed and confused. Some wept, others raged, and still others simply stared blankly into space, their minds struggling to cope with their newfound freedom. Jeremy and Vortis exchanged a weary glance. They both knew that their work was far from over. The Tarkalian people would need guidance, leadership, and above all, compassion, if they were to build a new society from the ashes of the old. Together, the human soldier and the Tarkalian princess set to work, their bond stronger than ever. They met with the leaders of the various Tarkalian factions, brokering truces and forging alliances. They reached out to the other galactic powers, establishing new lines of communication and diplomacy. And through it all, Jeremy and Vortis grew closer, their hearts and minds entwined in a way that transcended mere physical attraction. What had begun as an unlikely partnership had blossomed into something deeper, something that could weather any storm, overcome any obstacle. As they stood on the balcony of the newly rebuilt Tarkalian palace, watching the sun rise over a world reborn, Jeremy turned to Vortis, his eyes shining with emotion. He opened his mouth to speak, to give voice to the feelings that swelled within his heart. But as Jeremy opened his mouth, the words caught in his throat. The weight of their responsibilities, the chasm of their differences, yawned between them like a vast, unspannable gulf. In the years that followed, as Vortis threw herself into her role as Empress, Jeremy found himself increasingly adrift, a stranger in a strange land. He wandered the palace halls, his footsteps echoing in the emptiness, his heart aching for the closeness they had once shared. Vortis, always in meetings, always surrounded by advisors and petitioners, seemed further away than ever, even when she stood right beside him. One day, as Jeremy sat alone in their chambers, a servant burst in, her face pale with fear. "My lord," she gasped, "an urgent message from the frontier. The Quartak." Jeremy snatched the datapad from her trembling hands, his eyes widening as he read the terse, chilling words. The Quartak, a race of ruthless conquerors, demanded the Tarkalians' immediate surrender. The alternative was annihilation. He found Vortis in the war room, hunched over a holographic map of the Empire's defenses. Her eyes were hard, her jaw set with determination. "We will not submit," she growled, her claws digging into the edge of the table. "We will fight." "Wait," Jeremy said, placing a hand on her arm. "Let me go to them, try to negotiate. War should be our last resort, not our first." Vortis rounded on him, her eyes flashing. "You would have us bow to these invaders? After all we've sacrificed, all we've built?" "No," Jeremy said, his voice calm, his gaze steady. "But if there's even a chance for peace, we have to take it. Please, Vortis, trust me." She hesitated, torn between her warrior's instinct and her faith in Jeremy. Finally she nodded, her shoulders slumping. "Go then. But be careful. The Quartak are not known for their mercy." Jeremy's ship, a sleek Tarkalian cruiser, slipped through the void, a silver needle piercing the fabric of space. As it neared the Quartak homeworld, a planet of swirling red clouds and black continents, a sense of unease settled over the crew. "No response to our hail, sir," the communications officer reported, his scales gleaming in the dim light of the bridge. "They're ignoring us." Jeremy frowned, a chill running down his spine. Something was wrong. "Take us in," he ordered, "but be ready for anything." As the ship descended through the planet's atmosphere, a squadron of Quartak fighters rose to meet them, their angular hulls bristling with weapons. "Unidentified vessel," a harsh voice crackled over the comm. "You are trespassing in Quartak space. Surrender immediately, or be destroyed." Jeremy's response was cut off by a blinding flash of light. The Quartak had opened fire, their plasma cannons shredding the cruiser's shields like tissue paper. Alarms blared, consoles exploded in showers of sparks, and the deck bucked beneath Jeremy's feet. "Get us out of here," he shouted, but it was too late. A final, devastating salvo slammed into the ship's engines, and the cruiser plummeted from the sky, trailing smoke and flame. Jeremy awoke in a dark, cramped cell, his head throbbing, his body aching. He tried to sit up, but found his wrists and ankles bound by heavy metal shackles. The air was thick with the stench of blood and fear. A door hissed open, and a figure loomed in the doorway, tall and gaunt, its skin a sickly grey. "Human," it hissed, its voice like the scrape of a blade on bone. "You will tell us everything you know about the Tarkalians' defenses, their weaknesses, their plans." Jeremy set his jaw, his eyes blazing with defiance. "I will tell you nothing," he spat. "I would rather die." The Quartak smiled, a ghastly stretching of thin, bloodless lips. "Oh, you will not die, human, not yet, but you will wish you had." And then the pain began, a searing, unrelenting agony that tore through Jeremy's body like a wildfire. He screamed until his throat was raw, until the world dissolved into a red haze of suffering. But he did not break. Through the endless hours of torture, through the beatings and the burnings and the mind probes, he clung to one thought, one image: Vortis. Her strength, her courage, her unwavering love. She was his anchor, his lifeline, the one thing the Quartak could never take from him. When the Tarkalean strike force finally came, blasting through the walls of his prison in a storm of plasma fire and shattering stone, Jeremy was a husk of his former self. His body was broken, his mind shattered, his spirit all but extinguished. They brought him back to Vortis, laying his ravaged form at her feet. She wept over him, her tears falling like rain on his battered face. "My love," she whispered, "what have they done to you?" For days she sat by his bedside, holding his hand, whispering words of comfort and encouragement. But Jeremy was lost in a darkness deeper than any he had ever known, a pit of despair from which there seemed no escape. In the end, it was Vortis who made the decision. "You must go," she said, her voice thick with grief. "Back to your people, back to your world. There is nothing more I can do for you here." Jeremy, his eyes hollow, his voice a rasping whisper, could only nod. He knew she was right, knew that he could never be whole again, never be the man she needed him to be. And so, on a cold grey morning, he boarded a ship bound for Earth, his steps heavy, his heart a leaden weight in his chest. Vortis watched from the palace balcony, her eyes glistening with unshed tears, as the ship rose into the sky and vanished among the stars. She stood there for a long time, her gaze fixed on the horizon, her mind filled with memories of all they had shared, all they had lost. Then, with a final, shuddering breath, she turned away, her shoulders squared, her head held high. There was a war to fight, an empire to defend, and Empress Vortis, last of her line, would not fail her people, not now, not ever. You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.